Today we're going to talk about modern, feminist and tattooed pinups. I've always been interested... Dogs. Don't work with children or animals, they say. I've always been interested in the vintage styles and the music and the fashion, not so much the vintage values, which were quite horrible to women and people of colour, but that's another vlog. But I've also always been really interested in tattoos, thanks to my dad. There's been a movement in modern culture where many pin-up styles have come back into fashion, and the same with tattoos have become increasingly more popular, especially with the youth. A Harris poll in 2012 found that 1 out of every 5 adults, so about 21%, has at least one tattoo. An earlier Pew Research study found that the number was closer to 40% among 18 to 29-year-olds. So again, it's a lot of the younger ones who bring this sort of back, making it cool, letting people talk about it, and creating a new normal. I now have 3 tattoos, planning a lot more, and I invest a lot of time into my pin-up and tattoo research. And the more I do this, the more I realize the trend for modern pin-ups often have tattoos. So why is that? Well, a little history on the pin-up. In the 1800s, women started to break the molds that the patriarchy had created for them. They changed their choice of underwear, petticoats to bloomers, left their escorts at home, they rode bikes, and some even wore boots with pants. Oh my! In 1895, the hourglass figure became ideal when Life illustrator Charles Downer Gibson drew voluptuous women known as the Gibson Girls in their magazines, and similar images flooded the magazines such as Cosmopolitan from 1912 to the 1930s. Pin-up propaganda arrived when World War II started. That was in 1917, and these sexy illustrations were meant to convince men of joining the army. Similar images spread during World War II, and when men went off to war, they'd bring these illustrations with them and pin them up, hence pin-up. Dogs! They pinned them up so they could look at them while they were away from home. Some of them even had these tattooed. That's why you see a lot of the girls in the traditional style tattoos. Then the marketing of pin-ups did wonders for the army, so a lot of other things started to use that as well. They'd use the half-naked women in their illustrations or their posters or the photographs, and that's what led to Playboy launching in 1953. And that came about with Marilyn's nude photos, but again, that's another story. Now a little history of tattoos. Otzi the Iceman, who I love, was discovered in 1991 with 61 tattoos, and his body had been frozen for over 5,000 years. So far, he's the earliest known person to have tattoos, and they were used for chronic pain and medicinal purposes like acupuncture dry needling, which is really interesting. Long ago, tattoos were used in religious practices to show wealth and protection. Some mummies from ancient Egypt were discovered to have tattoos that were originally disregarded, thinking that these people must be prostitutes, but they were actually, related to the pharaoh, very high up people, royalty, and they had these little feminine tattoos to protect themselves and their babies during birth. Tattoos started to show up on sailors during the 1700s in Western culture. And during World War II, many more men started to get inked, influenced by Pearl Harbor and famed old-school designs by people such as Sailor Jerry. 1970s and the 80s brought punk rock and slightly more acceptance of tattoos, and now it seems every barista has one. And why not, really? You do you. So, why do modern women love this culture of tattoos and pin-ups together? Well, Gabrielle Jeffrey says, it lets women know femininity and being female is okay and definitely not a weakness. And I think that's the perfect description. Suzanne Salmon wrote a great article about feminism in pin-up culture and agrees with Jeffrey's statement that looking female is certainly not a weakness and it's nothing to be ashamed of. Pin-up culture is also very inclusive. Many different body types can find joy in the fashion such as curvy girls, stick thin girls, big on top, big on bottom, whatever. And you can find something that you'll love about the fashion. So maybe this is why these strong, confident females are not only displaying their empowering femininity, but also showing off their tattoos. Thankfully, feminism is becoming more mainstream and the younger generations are more accepting of the word, what it truly means, and accepting of themselves. They're willing to fight the patriarchy and willing to be heard. Women are strong and they're telling the world. So it's not surprising that these strong women such as these are getting inked and showing them off. There's a book by Margot Mifflin called Bodies of Subverse, A Secret History of Women and Tattoo. And the quote from this book that I really love says, 2012 was the first year in which more women than men were tattooed in the US. 23% of women compared to the 19% of men. Isn't that amazing? People often think it's men. Another quote is that tattoos appeal to contemporary women both as ensembles of empowerment in an era of feminist gains and badges of self-determination at a time when controversies about abortion rights, date rape, and sexual harassment have made men think hard about who controls their bodies and why. While things such as mental illness are still very taboo and older generations can still be quite dismissive of youth suffering similar conditions, the young people of today are making themselves seen and heard. They're taking back a little control of their bodies, and that is what pin-up culture is all about for me, like I said in a previous video. Not only do I suffer from diagnosed depression and anxiety, I also live with invisible illnesses, that's why I have a pacemaker, and they impact me daily. I have postural orthostatic tachycardia syndrome, or POTS, neurocardiogenic syncope, and that is also the two forms of dysautonomia. I have chronic pain, I have IBS, I have a whole bunch of stuff. Dressing up when I have the strength to get out of bed and doing my hair and makeup like this, it makes me feel really, really good and makes me feel better about myself. And I can control something. I have that little control over my body. I save up my money instead of spending it on travel, on pin-up stuff. It seems to me that not only does modern pin-up culture celebrate the strength and femininity, but also represents taking that femininity and in turn their own bodies back. I'm sure other pin-up enthusiasts do it for many other reasons as well, but that's what it means to me. And that's what this culture is so wonderful, because modern pin-ups are strong and fascinating, whether they are inked or not, and they should be celebrated. What do you think? Put your comments down below. Thanks for watching.